Hey guys, my name is Abena Rockcliffe. I'm here with Kemol King, and we're welcoming you to another episode of Frank Discussions. This week's edition is neither an interview or a debate. This is one of our conversation episodes. Kemol and I are both advocates for human rights, and we are against indignity. So tonight we want to frame what we hope will be a fruitful and measurably frank discussion on a very important concept, which is xenophobia. And we're talking about xenophobia not in the context only of how we treat Chinese and other communities of foreigners in our beloved country, but particularly how we treat the Venezuelans amongst us. It is interesting and somewhat ironic that Guyanese, of all the groups, can be afflicted with xenophobia when we have more of our population by a couple 100,000 living outside of our country than those living here. Our intolerance for foreigners have been growing for quite some time, but the way we treat Venezuelans in particular is quite interesting. Guyanese have become somewhat agitated because of the recent act of terrorism that occurred on Regent Street, which resulted in the loss of life or the death of an innocent child, Soraya. May her soul rest in peace. The feeling of anger and disgust is natural and it is expected. But we must not allow our hatred for that which was unjust cause us to perpetuate injustice. And ever since this incident, I have came into contact or heard of Venezuelans who have been treated with some amount of scorn. We should also remember that a lot of the Venezuelans or Spanish speakers in our midst are those who are returning from Venezuela, people who left Guyana when the chips were down and we were looking for betterment. So some of them are actually Guyanese and some of them are of Guyanese parentage. So sometimes we would be mistreating our own. The president's decision to have the state seek the death penalty is welcomed, I anticipate, by all right thinking Guyanese because of the heinous crime that it was. But it shouldn't cause us to be generally suspicious of all Venezuelans. I understand that the issue with how we treated Venezuelans are or is nuanced because it's not just foreigners, it's not just xenophobia, it's also because of the conflict that we have with Venezuela, or I should say controversy.
All right.
Kimal, tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, so I'm going to try to make it very brief.
Thank you.
A history of the Guyana-Venezuela territorial controversy. So in 1899, there was a dispute between Venezuela and what was then British Guyana, because Guyana was a colony of Britain, over what territory belonged to whom. And so at the time, an arbitral tribunal, when you hear arbitration today, you talk about resolving disputes, had been set up to resolve this dispute. And at that time, that tribunal awarded, as it did, the Essequibo region to British Guyana. Now, the deal was fine at the time. All of the parties accepted it. They even participated later down the line in a mapping of the borders and an establishment of what they call the trijunction point, which sits at the top of Mount Roraima, the trijunction point between Guyana, British Guyana at the time, Venezuela, and Brazil. But many decades later, Venezuela brought up concerns about what led to the decision by the the arbitral tribunal. And what they said was that they believed that the award that was done by the tribunal is null and void. And they argued this using a letter that was posthumously published by a man who had been a lawyer on the Venezuela side. Posthumously means it was
Absolutely.
published after his death.
Yeah.
And they said that this man accused the tribunal of collusion and political compromise. So it's on that basis they were saying that it's not a fair award, right? So as Guyana prepared for independence in the 1960s, Venezuela brought up this, and they had to devise something to resolve this controversy. And there was the document called the Geneva Agreement. So Guyana became a signatory to this agreement. And the Geneva Agreement includes mechanisms that could potentially be used to resolve the controversy. And over many years, there have been attempts to use the mechanisms outlined in there to resolve the controversy, but to no avail. So,
Especially the good officers.
right, I'm trying to compress it.
Okay.
So eventually, Guyana decided, we're in the 2000s now, that Guyana did not believe that Venezuela was acting in good faith. So it approached the United Nations Secretary General to decide what next could we do in order to resolve this process quickly. And at the time, ExxonMobil had just discovered oil and so on. So a lot is at stake. And the UN Secretary General decided to have one more year, to recommend one more year of enhanced mediation in order to try to solve this problem. And if they didn't solve it, then it would have to be, he would have to make a decision about what to do. So, of course, the year didn't work. And the UN Secretary General, well, the new one that came in, Antonio Guterres, he referred the matter to the ICJ. The International Court of Justice is the court. It is an arm of the United Nations, the judicial arm. And so Guyana filed its case with the court, and it has been there ever since. Venezuela has said that it does not recognize the jurisdiction of the court, and therefore has said that whatever decision the court makes, it's not going to abide by. But it has still been participating in the hearings. In two cases, Venezuela has filed, I suppose, what I would term as roadblocks to the case. In one instance, it argued that the case before the court was not admissible. And then in another instance, it argued that the court did not have the jurisdiction to hear the case. And in both cases, the court decided that Venezuela's assertions were not correct. So Carl Greenidge, who is an agent on behalf of Guyana at the court, has said that he estimates there could be a final ruling to resolve this issue in 2026, which is next year. But also the important context to add is following Venezuela saying that the 1899 arbitral award is null and void, it has laid claim to the Essequibo territory, calling it Guyana Essequiba. And it has also, as a result, laid claim to large swaths of offshore territory. But one of the things that the court said in advance of adjudicating and deciding on the whole case is that Venezuela should not do anything to amend the status quo, which is that Guyana currently controls and administers this territory.
Yes. Okay, that was a good job. Keep compressing the information and keep it concise. I know you can be long-winded sometimes too. So we have that controversy, and then we have the feeling that is also fueling Guyanese to be a little tense with the Venezuelans here. In addition to the last act of terrorism, there were some other acts of terrorism.
Attempts, mostly.
Attempts.
Yes.
But no one was hurt, but the bombs went off. There was at one at the police station.
Yes,
And
it was
one
at
GPL, I think.
East Rheinveld Police Station.
And the police told us that they were Spanish speakers, but there was no arrest in those cases, and we never got to the bottom of it. So there's still that feeling that those people can be plotting and they're amongst us. And then we had the former Minister of Home Affairs, Robeson Ben, saying that they are sleeper agents. He stood in Parliament and said that there are quite a few Venezuelan sleeper agents here. And statements like that wouldn't necessarily help people
No, it
in being
wouldn't.
suspicious. Because you never know. That's a sleeper agent. You never
Yeah.
know who is
So
who.
they're skeptical of every Spanish speaker they see.
Right?
Yeah.
And we saw before the court that it wasn't just men.
Mm-hmm.
There were also women involved in the plot,
And they were Guyanese.
and Guyanese. But people, the Guyanese, and looking at the Guyanese too much.
Mm-hmm.
So I told one of my friends that I am gonna get my nails done, and she asked me, "Oh, where are you getting nails done?" And I tell her, "Well, this place where I do my nails." And I said, "There are enough Spanish girls that just walk past and things." And she was like, "You tried it with the Spanish." And the thing of it is that this is my friend, a well-educated person, and still, she is prejudiced about the Spanish girls who do nails because she thinks that they're out to get us. And I want to stress as much as possible, there might be those, but I don't think it's the girl that doing this all the time till your hand fall, feel like it can fall off on the nails. But the fact that the Guyana police force is specifically in the context of being reactive, the fact the force is what it is, that does not help either. The fact that we have the border controversy, it does not help. But what can really help to help us to maintain our humanity is to also understand what is happening in Venezuela, how they came from prosperity to the place they are now. And I think you can give us a rundown on that.
Okay. So there are many factors that led to the economic collapse in Venezuela. One of the things is that they have a lot of oil. So how they managed their country is that they became extremely dependent on oil. And so they became susceptible to some of the disruptions you see when there's a global oil price collapse, for example. You can't earn as much when you are not getting to sell your oil for a certain price. And their economy was being, bankrolled by the immense revenues they would get during an oil price high. So that's one of the things that caused the economy to get downturns.
Yeah.
There was also the reported mismanagement of PDVSA, which is their state oil company. There was a lot of political interference, mass firing of experienced staff, and so on. And there was also in the country things like price and currency controls that was imposed by the government. And the state of affairs led to things like shortages of food and medicine and basic goods. And this difficulty that the people were having, this caused severe migrant and refugee exodus because there was also hyperinflation of the currency, there was money printing. And so people looked around and they realized that look at how we're living now, look how difficult it is to feed our families. We can't stay here. So tens of thousands of people started to go. I may be very conservative when I say tens of thousands.
Millions.
And so another of the things that happened is that there were sanctions imposed on the country that's still
Particularly by
affecting
the
them
US.
today. So there was the fact that they had elections, and the way in which they ran elections did not give some countries in the West, many countries, the confidence that it was democratic. So the United States is one of the countries, well, it's the country that led this movement to sanction Venezuela. And this is causing the country to not be able to some extent, above board, sell its oil. So there is some oil production that happens.
They can't market and sell.
Right. And we've been seeing reports that Venezuela has been using a shadow fleet in order to sell its oil. But all of these things that's happening, including the reported political authoritarianism, it's creating a state of affairs in the country that is difficult for people. And so, just like lots of Guyanese left here when we had economically difficult times, people are leaving there now. Not that
We were never in that
We
stage,
were
but
never in
when
that.
our chips were down,
Yeah.
a lot of people who didn't necessarily like the Burnham era and stuff, a lot of people left and to this day, approximately 1 million people or more are living outside of Guyana, which is
Yeah.
way more than we have here. So there, Kemol did a good job giving you a sort of a timeline as to how they move from. Usually people say rags to riches, but they're like from riches to rags. And in addition to not being able to sell the oil, even their gold, they can't get to sell. That's why there's the rumor, I can't say how true it is, that some Guyanese facilitated selling Venezuelan gold because they themselves can't get it out. So you heard from Kemol, but let us hear from a Venezuelan. This is a Venezuelan living in Canada. Let us hear a bit about what she said.
I want to talk about what's happening in Venezuela and give some context from an actual Venezuelan. Maduro, bad. Trump, bad. Getting rid of Maduro, good. An American intervention into Venezuela, bad. Now you're going to see a lot of Venezuelans who seem to be in support of this American intervention, not because we're naive or because we don't understand what it could mean. Nobody wants to be bombed by the Yanks, okay? But that should give you an idea as just how desperate Venezuelans are. Maduro is not the legal president of Venezuela. He lost the 2024 election to Edmundo Gonzalez. That is an indisputable fact. But this isn't so much about the nitty-gritty of the politics as much as it is about the effects of those politics on the people. Imagine this. You wake up, there's no water, as usual. The lights have been out for about 10 hours. Your fridge starts to smell because the power keeps going out. So you're like, okay, I'm going to go out and buy some new food. You get there and the food is even more expensive than it was before. Food has gone up 21.9% in price since just last October. Actually, food prices have gone up 12,000% since 2009. So that's like a tomato being worth $1. Now that same tomato is worth $12,000. That's how crazy the food situation is in Venezuela. These rolling blackouts too that I mentioned have a huge effect on the hospital systems. Often you will be in the middle of surgery and the electricity goes off. So you have a country where you have very little access to food, and we know little access to food usually means a huge increase in crime. That has happened in Venezuela. You have a dangerous country, you don't have access to food, water, electricity, and your hospital systems have been terrible. On top of these brutal living conditions, you have this political violence hovering on top of you. If you speak out about what's happening, you are very likely to be disappeared into El Helicoide, which is the largest torture center in the Americas. In July of 2024 came Operation Tuntun. So basically the government would come knocking on your door if you made any posts that were against the government. And if your neighbors outed you for being out protesting, you would be likely to be kidnapped and sent to this torture center. In just the month of July 2024, 1,900 political prisoners were taken. Those numbers have gone up to over 3,000, most of those being youth and most of those being underage girls. Since 2014, there has been 17,888 politically motivated arrests in Venezuela. More than 8 million Venezuelans have fled the country. Our families are scattered across the world because we can't safely live home. And back in Venezuela, the regime allows mining that is tearing apart the Orinoco Delta, poisoning rivers with mercury and displacing indigenous people, allowing miners to go into indigenous territories, spreading diseases and kidnapping and human trafficking indigenous women. So when you see Venezuelans expressing support for an invasion, please understand, no one wants to be invaded, especially not by a country with such a brutal, violent global history. But Venezuelans are running out of options. Our hope is real. But underneath that hope is fear, exhaustion, and deep sadness for having to survive this horrific, violent, corrupt dictatorship. So please give us some space to feel all these emotions. Venezuelans aren't dumb. We are hardworking people who just want the best, like everyone else, to live a normal life. Thanks for listening.
Great. So we heard how painful it is for Venezuelans who fled the country, not only because they cannot be in their homeland, but because some families are scattered across the world. Imagine a family of 5, and they're spread across the world, 2 in the US, 2 in Canada, and 1 probably in Suriname. These people were displaced, and they really have no hope. So a lot of the times the Venezuelans that we see here are not those who are pro Maduro, but those people who are suffering and who are somewhat hurt that they had to leave their homeland. And imagine how it is for them. They have to operate in a country where many of them don't understand English, and a lot of times no English. And as frustrating it is for me when I want to tell my nail girl go lower and she can't understand, imagine how it is for them if they go to the hospital and they can't properly explain, what's the problem. So the title of our show, as you should be seeing somewhere across the screen there, is What Do We Owe the Venezuelans? It is a play on the title of a book by Thomas Scanlon. It is a book on moral philosophy that primarily explores the theory of contractualism. Contractualism claims that an action is morally right if it can be justified to those affected by it, based on some unwritten agreement or contract. One action should not be rejected by a reasonable person. And in this theory, they stress a reasonable person. So in contractualism, it's basically, as you know, the theory that informs the golden rule. And we see this in do unto others as you have them do unto you. You see it in different ways in different cultures and religion and said in different languages. Even I think Jesus said it, and then Prophet Muhammad said it too. So it's not just a cultural thing, but also religious. So basically, give people what you expect for yourself. And as we know, as we said earlier, a lot of Guyanese are not in Guyana. We recall when the chips were down and they had a bench in Barbados for us. And the Trinidadians looked down on us, and we were treated with scorn in many countries, and we never liked it. So why perpetuate the same scorn on others who really wouldn't do it if they didn't have to? Over 7.9 million Venezuelans have fled the country for the past few years to escape what we know is the turmoil there. The majority of Venezuelans are in Colombia, which is natural, a Spanish-speaking country, you can go there. So they have over 3 million Venezuelans there, followed by Peru and Brazil. The problem with Guyana is that we do not know how many Venezuelans we have here. So I see they keep calling for figures on it, and we can't say if it's rivaling our it can be rivaling our population. But it's a growing Venezuelan population, and we saw people talk about the dangers in allowing those nationals to be too much in our country, given the nuances of the situation. To help us understand and to solidify the fact that not all Venezuelans are pro-Maduro, let's take a look at this clip from 60 Minutes.
We went to a market in Caracas. It was very busy. When we were at the market, we'd ask people questions and they'd kind of back off, and they're nervous that somebody's listening from the regime.
No me gusta hablar del gobierno porque no voy a favor del gobierno. No toco esos temas. No voy a favor, voy a en contra. Porque yo quisiera de que este mundo cambiara para yo poder tener un buen futuro.
What happens if somebody speaks out against the government?
Pues no sería que estén nerviosos en hablar contra el gobierno. 3 días antes de la votación te mandan un bono para que tú votes, igual al gobierno.
A lot of people were very fearful about the large military presence off the coast.
Are you scared right now?
Sí, me da miedo, bueno, miedo en el sentido porque yo tengo hijos, tengo nietos, tengo a mi madre viva y me da mucho miedo que vayan a bombardear Venezuela sin motivo alguno.
And we'd also ask them what would happen if President Maduro was removed. What do you think would happen if President Maduro was removed from office?
Venezuela cambiara y todos fuéramos libres y...
Do you think President Maduro could be removed?
Bueno, si es necesario.
If that's necessary?
Si van a poner otro mejor.
If they're going to put someone better?
Deberían.
They should. And then there was a gentleman, and he interrupted our interview and said, "We're a sovereign nation, so butt out."
Bueno, que es un abuso totalmente de los norteamericanos. Nosotros estamos en un país soberano.
Cada país debe ocuparse de su problema político de ellos, interno. Bueno, Venezuela se ocupará su presidente de Venezuela. Que lo que no estoy de acuerdo es que un presidente tenga que venir a intervenir o opinar sobre cómo se debe manejar el país. No debería.
Great. So in that clip, we see that there were mixed views. You saw those who are expressing frustration about their plight and the economic situation and basically the government control. And yet you saw the other man, even though he is seeing the suffering as well. He's saying it's a sovereign country and people shouldn't get involved. So you always have that mixture. So to answer the question, what do we owe the Venezuelans? We do not owe them our land or any part of our territory. Essequibo belongs to Guyana exclusively. What we do owe Venezuelans, based on the law of contractualism, is respect and decency. So when you see a Venezuelan person in the street, try not to treat them inhumane in some of the ways that we really ill-treat some of the Chinese nationals. I was in a supermarket recently, and if you see how this man going on in the Chinese people's supermarket, oh, I would broke up in here. And so, anyway, let's try not to do that. Respect those in our midst, respect Guyanese, respect the foreigners, and let's just do unto others as we'll have them do unto us. I'm Abena Rockcliffe. Kemol, do you want to say anything before we leave? I'm Abena Rockcliffe here with Kemol King. Thanks for tuning in.